Hello, art historians, and welcome to our crash course review over the short essay questions for the AP exam. Now, on the AP exam, there are going to be 6 essay questions that you're going to be given. 2 of them are the longer 35-minute essays, and then there are the 4 shorter essays. So for this particular video, we're just going to jump in and look at those 4 shorter essays, what they're going to look like and what they're going to be asking you for. And then at the end of the video, we're going to review some helpful tips for whenever you are answering those questions. So again, on the AP Art History exam, all right, there are 6 different questions you're going to have to answer that are written responses. And 2 of them, as I mentioned, are going to be longer essays, which are going to be the 35-minute essays. And those will focus on comparison skills and visual and contextual analysis, but we'll review those in another video. In this video, we're just going to worry about those 4 shorter questions and give you some examples and ways that you can ace those questions. All right, so one of the first questions that you're going to come across in the short answer questions is the visual analysis, all right? And visual analysis is really asking you to say what you see, all right? So for example, I talk to my students a lot, and we practice this skill a lot. Of this kind of skill, this visual analysis starts with your ability to describe a work of art as if you were on the phone with someone in a museum, which you'd obviously never do because that's rude, and you're trying to describe this amazing work of art in front of you that your friends can't see. So you would be trying to get to paint that picture for them or make it come alive for them by your description. Another activity that I do with my students is I give them a video and I give them a picture and I say, okay, you are going to get somebody to draw this without them seeing it. All right, so you're really going to need to describe the things like the elements that you see, like how the artist uses the lines, how they use the colors, how they use the shapes. Is it balanced? Is it a texture? So really that visual analysis is breaking down what you see, right? The reason it's asking you to break down what you see is because the question is really about how the artist uses those different techniques and why they use those particular techniques in creating this work of art. So think about this. Why did they use that color? Why did they use such a bright color? Why did they use those lines to create depth? What were they going for? Why are they using lines to emphasize that person? All right, so the first part of this is looking at, okay, what do you see the artist doing? Right? They're using color, they're using line, they're using atmospheric perspective, they're using linear perspective, they're using chiaroscuro, which these are all terms you're probably going to be learning later on, to go from light to dark. Why? How did they use these techniques and why did they use these techniques? What was the ultimate goal of the artist and the mediums that they used or the techniques that they used? So this question, when it comes across, is really about breaking down what do you see the artist doing and why did they do it, right? What was the point of this, right? So let's look at an example of this. If I wanted to use the standard of from Near Eastern art, okay? So from Unit 2, right? If I wanted to use this work of art, okay? So some typical questions you might see, and notice that there's gonna be multiple bullets. It's gonna ask you to do multiple things within this question. And it's really, really important that you answer all of them. And a pro tip here is that if you answer them all in the right order, sometimes that gives you clues for the next one, right? As far as what it's looking for. So you have to look very closely. So the first thing is describe how the artist created movement within this work, right? That's when you would go back to those elements that you come up with, that you have, those elements. What did the artist use in order to create movement? All right, so in this case, we have lines, right? If you look at this, so for example, the lines of the chariots, the lines of the horses, the direction that the arrows are going, the lines in the direction the people are facing, all of those things help create movement, right? Because the lines kind of undulate and wave and go, and it kind of draws your eye almost like it's a moving, rolling battle scene, right? So that's it. Just describe the how. The how, guys, you really want to look for those elements, okay? How did they create movement? Movement is a principle. So how did they create movement? Was it line? Was it color? Was it the light to dark? Does that move your eye across the page? The next one, almost a little bit of a separate question. Describe how the artist created a narrative in this work. So a narrative is telling a story. How did the artist create a narrative? Well, if you notice, they use line again to divide this scene up into registers, all right? So here's, and also in the placement of the form. So we have this top row, this middle row, and this bottom row that tells a narrative story, right? So by creating lines, it divides it up into scenes. If you're getting a how question, watch for those elements and principles. That's what you want to be looking for, all right? Now, the next one, explain 2 ways that the artist created emphasis on the ruler in this work, okay? So again, we have a principle, emphasis. So how did they create emphasis? Well, very quickly, you can see here, let's think about those elements and principles. They use color, right? Obviously, he's in bright white. Right, that is very easy to do. And value. So not only is it white, it's brighter so that it's there. They also use, you could use scale. All right, so he's bigger than everybody else. Right, or the shape of the form. He's larger. You could also do placement. He places him right in the middle, right in the center of the top row. Okay, so it's the how. Right, how did they do that? Break it down. All right, then the next one. How are these visual characteristics of this work typical of art during this time? So we're going to tie it into, okay, what is this artist doing that's pretty typical for art during early civilizations? Well, we know art of early civilizations, they used hierarchy of scale. That's a tool that an artist uses to convey a message. Like it's a technique that, hey, I can say that this person is bigger by, and more important, by using hierarchy of scale, right? You could also say the telling of stories in registers, right? That is pretty typical of this time. We've seen that, all right? You could also say the medium, if you wanted to get into that this is lapis lazuli. So that's very, very expensive and it's rare in this region during this time. So that could convey that it has status. That is another way to achieve a message of the artist. So really look for those visual analysis. It's the how they created something and maybe the why they created something. Okay, so really think about that. So another question you're going to come across in the SAQs is change and continuity. And this is as simple as it sounds. The wording just gets in the way. All you're really looking for here is watching for how this work of art continues early traditions, right? So they'll say continuity or continues. How is this work a continuation of what we have already seen in this culture or this time period or this movement, right? So how is this traditional? What typical things does it continue that you would normally see? Then on the other side, how does it break from those traditions? How does it start doing something different? What is new about it? What did they add? What did they try different? What did they break away from? So when you're seeing continuity, right? Put that work of art within a specific time or movement. So for example, Egyptian, Near Eastern, ancient civilizations. What is typical Egyptian? What is different from typical Egyptian? All right, those are things to think about. So for example, all right, if I had the statue of Hatshepsut kneeling, all right, which you can look up, I forgot to add the image on here. But if you have the statue of Hatshepsut kneeling, all right, notice it's saying specific visual evidence. That is one of the most important things for you to remember, that when it's asking for specific visual evidence, it means what could you point to on the work of art and go, look, right there, right? It's right, I can show you this. That right there is proof of this, all right? So for example, if we were looking at Hatshepsut, all right, and the kneeling statue, what a continuity in how they show a royal figure in ancient Egypt. Well, you can see that she has the traditional headdress on. You can see that there's very little negative space, all right, on her sides. You can see that it's made of a very tough material. You can point to those things, okay? Then on the other hand, how does it demonstrate a change from the conventions of showing a royal figure? Now, she didn't change much. Remember, the idea was to be that she, even though she's a woman, she still can, rule in a man's world. However, we do see the definition of a bust. We do see that she is shown with a little bit of softer facial features, all right? However, she is still shown doing, the content can work in this too. So not just the way it's made, but the content. She's shown doing an offering, which is typical for male pharaohs. She's shown doing the same things that a pharaoh does. She's shown looking the same way that a pharaoh does. But would that work? No, because that's not specific visual evidence. She has the beard. That's visual evidence you could point to and go, look, see, she's got the beard. She's got the headdress. I can point to it. Now, the last one, if you look at it, is specific contextual evidence. Context is what was going on that caused her to have traditional forms, or if it was to break for it. Well, continuity, what was going on with her, she was a female ruling over Egypt, and she was trying at that time to prove that therefore she was just as good as any man, and that she was stepping into this role. It didn't matter that she was a woman. She could still do the role of a pharaoh, and she was going to continue on those traditions. That is specific contextual evidence, right? That this is what was going on at the time. This is why it looks the way that it does. This is why she continued. All right, so question number 3 is a context question, all right? Context focuses on the why. So this question I really like to explain. This is the art history. This is the history part of art history. What was going on at the time that made this work of art look the way that it does, either in how it's made, the content, what's going on in the scene, all of those things, all right? So for example, if this was, so this is one of the Venus figurines from prehistoric art, all right? So they'll tell you this is a Venus figurine from the Paleolithic era, all right? Describe 2 aspects of the historical and or, so you can do either one, but still 2. So it could be 2 historical, 2 religious, or 1 historical, 1 religious context behind the creation of the Venus figurines, okay? So historical, right? These were, during this time, this is a really good phrase in context, during this time, or so during the Paleolithic era. That's a really good way to start a context question, all right? So during the Paleolithic era, humans were nomadic, right? That's historical. They were hunter-gatherers who moved from place to place. Therefore, they created works of art, right, that were small, right, in nature, okay, or that were portable in nature. You could also look at the religious side of it, that they really focused on things that were cyclical during this time. So macro, or these, macrocosmic events that were very predictable, that the sun would rise, then the moon would rise, and that the seasons would change and everything would go in a cycle, and females were cyclical in nature also. So therefore women were valued as kind of the same way that they were revered, right? As, this idea of female fertility and the idea that it was cyclical kind of in the same way. So female objects were, objects of worship basically. So what you're looking at here is historical and religious context behind why these were created. Now, then you get into, okay, how did the context influence the size and the imagery? All right, so which is kind of what I've already started doing, but it's first of all, what was going on at the time? And then down here at the bottom is, okay, how did what was going on at the time impact such as the size or the imagery? So for example, her face is not important because it's not about a specific woman. Her face is covered, but it's about the idea of women as cyclical and having kind of this power of creation, the same way that the seasons have this power of creation. So it's the how looks because of what was going on at the time. All right, so what was happening in the history that impacted how the art looks, the size of it, the form of it, etc. So the last short answer question is the attribution question. This question is basically a big fancy way of asking you, how do you know it's blank, right? How do you know it's Egyptian? How do you know it's Romanticist? How do you know that it's Chinese? How do you know, all right? So when it says to attribute this work of art or architecture to a particular group, artist, culture, time period, it's going to ask you, okay, how do you know that? Okay, so you should be able to look at a work of art and go, okay, I know that's Van Gogh. I know that that is Egyptian, all right? So for example, all right, I'm using the Victory Stela of Naram Sin from Mesopotamia, which is not on the 250, all right? But it will ask you, it will be, it's usually going to be an unknown. All right, so it's not going to be one from the 250. It's going to be one that you should recognize as being like one from the 250. And it will usually tell you to compare it to one from the 250. So for example, correctly attribute this work to the culture that created it. Pretty easy. I attribute this work of art to Near Eastern, okay, or Mesopotamia or Sumerian, right? How specific you want to get. Using specific visual evidence. Remember, this is important that you can point to and go, look right there, right? Justify your attribution. That means prove it or support it, right? By describing at least two similarities between this work and another work by the same culture. So you could say, all right, I know this is Near Eastern because it looks like the Standard of Ur, right? How do I know that? Because it uses hierarchy of scale. I'm going to need visual evidence. Prove it. Well, this guy right here in the center, Naram Sim, he's larger than everybody else. That emphasizes his importance, just like in the Standard of Ur, right? So then you would come up with another way. How does it do it? Well, you could, stretch this a little bit, but it almost looks like it tells the story in registers, right? So it starts with Naram Sim, works its way down. So it tells the story in registers, which was very common for Near Eastern art that was telling some kind of story. So you could say, I know because it looks like this work, and here is how these two works are similar, all right? Then, using specific evidence, explain how the context influenced the form. So remember, the context is the history, right? So what was going on in history that influenced how this looks, right? Well, you could be like, this is during the time of early civilizations, when a large number of rulers are trying to justify their rule through religion. So this ruler uses the three suns as a way to justify the gods blessing him, so he can support his rule, or approving what he does, so it supports his rule. So putting the context in to explain why this looks the way it does. All right, so those are the 4 short answer questions. All right, this video is not going to cover the 2 longer essays. It's going to cover the 4 short answer questions. Here are some other helpful essay tips for when you're writing your SAQs. Use words from the prompt when answering each section, all right? So for example, if it says, let's go back one. Okay. So it says, correctly attribute this work to the culture that created it. All right. So I would attribute this work to the Sumerian culture, right? Use words from the prompt to answer your question. All right. That's just good practice. All right. When you are answering the questions, underline or write down the key words so that you know you're answering the right things and that you are answering everything. Another good strategy is as you answer each part, remember, there might be multiple things that you have to do within one bulleted section. Cross those off. Like, okay, I did that. I'm good. Use complete sentences. You will not get credit for bullet points, all right? Use complete sentences. And another good rule of thumb is create separation in between each section that you are answering. Don't let them blur together. It just makes your reader a lot happier. Don't call these pieces of art, call them works of art. All right, remember, because works conveys purpose, right? And these all had a purpose. They were thought about. Leave your opinion out, all right? Unfortunately, you just don't have the time for that, and it won't help your response. Don't say that they did a good job. Don't say they did a bad job. Don't say that this is the best work of art. Leave your opinion out. And remember, when it comes to visual evidence, be specific so that you could point to it. Don't just say that they use hierarchy of scale. Be specific. Where do they use it? How do they use it? Give as much specific information as you can when you are answering these questions. Good luck. I know you're going to do great.